5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Alright then. Hello, willkommen, bienvenue, konnichiwa, ni hao, jambo, marhaba. It's time for the Arms Inquisition yet again, episode 257 on Sunday, the 13th of November, 2020. I'm Amish Bill.
I'm Amish Ben.
And I'm Amish Ben. Episode 257 on Sunday, the 13th of November. Tonight we're joined by orgonomy researcher and blogger Leon Southgate. How are you doing, Leon?
Good, thanks. Yeah.
Sorry, I just faded out. Say again, orgonomy researcher and blogger.
Good, thank you.
Leon Southgate, how are you doing?
Stand by. Technical issue going on here. What's going on? No, I've got YouTube.
Yeah, good, thank you.
We just had an infinite doom loop then. We had an infinite doom loop. Sorry, Leon. How are you doing, mate?
Well, I'm doing good, yeah, cheers. Sure.
Matt Apocalypse in chat getting crazy audio feedback.
Absolutely.
Holy cow.
Is there those orgones floating around?
Yeah, we had a bit of an orgone feedback loop.
Yeah.
Jeez Louise. Solly, you're not far from us, I don't think, Leon. Are you in the northwest?
I am, yeah, just near Liverpool and near the Mersey, and not far. Well, I'm kind of in between Liverpool and Cheshire, so it's a nice little bit of the world, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Now then, we were talking briefly about Peter Jones because this isn't our first dive into orgonomy, isn't it? Is it? But it's been a long time. I look back and I think it's episode 96. Wow. The last time when we spoke to Peter Jones.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people will be coming to this fresh. So, I mean, I think it's fair to say it's quite a niche area, isn't it, orgonomy? So how did you get into this?
Well, through my father. But it's and through Wilhelm Reich's son, strangely enough, because Wilhelm Reich's son wrote a book about the time with his dad around a sort of the height of their cloud busting experiments, and he that book was on my dad's psychotherapy bookshelf, and that's what called A Book of Dreams. It's a brilliant book. It really gives you insight into like that most crucial time in Reich's life, and so that kindled my interest in orgonomy. And my dad had an orgone blanket and things like that, and he'd referenced Reich in his work because he'd always been interested in group dynamics. So Reich was one of the people that influenced my dad. He was kind of a bit of a renegade psychotherapist in North London.
Really?
Yeah, he set up his own institute and then got booted out of his own institute for being too controversial at one point. But he I think it was called the Institute for Self-Analysis, and then CAT, the Center for Attachment-Based Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy. So I grew up in a psychotherapy school where, when I lived part-time with my dad, so I actually lived inside a psychotherapy institute. So that introduced me to orgonomy, and it is a niche area, but it's a strange niche because although it's kind of quite small, it's been really steady since, like, apart from a few years after Reich died, there's been about 20 doctors and spotted about the world, and 2 or 3 journals, and the output of research that has been continuous since it's never really it's never really stopped, which is kind of unusual for a niche area. It's just like ticked along the since Reich passed away in 1957. But my dad sort of introduced me to orgone and Reich, and then I did an acupuncture degree. And the end of the acupuncture course, you had an option to do a master's study. So I did a research degree, and I was thinking, oh, what should I do it in? And then the memories of my dad's orgone blanket and the Peter Reich's book came back to me, and that was really the start of my whole kind of passion in life, really. So I didn't really find my path in life till I was sort of 30. So and that's been my path ever since, really. It's been quite a quite a sort of quite a single-minded path since then, really.
One of the things that really surprised me about when we were talking to Peter Jones, because I think we went into that knowing pretty much nothing about Wilhelm Reich, but what really astonished me was the book burning.
Yeah. Yeah, the book burning is, I think Reich is actually almost unique in history of being the only person to have his books burnt 4 times by 3 major world governments. But I don't think anyone else has got that record. The Soviet Union burnt his books and put him on a list. Nazi Germany burnt his books and put him on a list. And the Americans, the American government twice burnt his books.
Wow.
One, I think 50, was it 50s? It would have been about 55, and then again about 62, I think. So especially the mass psychology of fascism, that really got the American governments worried. I think as much as the concept of orgone, his outlining of the psychology of fascism, which there's that guy, he mass formation psychology.
Matthias Desmet.
Yeah, he's gotten quite a lot of traction recently with that, and that's pretty. There is a couple of other people as well, but that does kind of reminisce of Reich's mass psychology of fascism.
Can you still get hold of that?
Yeah. All the books have been reprinted now. Even
just makes me want to read it more. The fact that governments wanted to burn it, it makes me want to read it more.
It's available from the Farrar, Straus and Giroux were the original publishers, but I'm not sure if they're still publishing it. But it's pretty much available. The mass psychology of fascism, and the one book that wasn't available, the Wilhelm Reich Museum had reprinted it. His last book, which even some people in orgonomy find Reich's last book too much and don't like to mention it too much. It's called Contact with Space, and it details the radioactive cloud busting experiments and all the kind of crazy stuff that went on in about the mid-50s.
Sorry, you just mentioned the cloud busting before.
Just one sec. Leon, could you turn your speakers down a little bit, or your...
Yeah, sure.
I'm hearing it buzz back. What were you going to say?
How's that?
1,
2,
3.
Sound.
Right, okay. So, yeah, I was just asking about the cloud. What is the cloud busting experiments? Can you explain that a little bit? Because that sounds a bit crazy.
Yeah, sure. Well, the cloud, strangely enough, where someone asked me about, what's the best evidence in orgonomy, and I looked through it and I looked at my own evidence, which is in kind of medical areas, and then I looked at how much medical evidence is available overall, and there's a fair amount because, as I was saying, the doctors have been rolling over, doing bits of work continually since the 50s. So it's one of the few areas in kind of very unorthodox science that's got sort of a good, what is it, 70 years worth of research and journals published now. But out of all the areas, thanks to James DeMeo, the orgone scientist who passed away, the cloud busting is the best evidenced, and it's really quite strongly evidenced from. There's James DeMeo did a master's study at Kansas University and provided good evidence that the cloud busters do have a genuine effect on cloud formation and dispersal. And then he was going to do a PhD, but it got blocked by the government agency, pressured Kansas University not to allow that to go ahead. But
how did they know that? Is that documented, sort of thing?
Yeah, it is. He kind of he probably wouldn't, if it in hindsight he wouldn't do the same thing, I'm sure. But he applied for funding for the study because things like cloud seeding are well. There's enormous funds put into cloud seeding, and it doesn't even work that well. And it just basically throwing chemicals into clouds and hoping that they attract a bit more moisture. So he was thinking, well, that's funded so much, I'll apply for some funding, and that well, this was back in the late 80s, I think. I can't remember exactly. I think it's late 80s, and so that attracted the government's attention. I think there's a national the National Science Council or something along those lines. It came to their attention, and then it would have got back to sort of national government, and then they sort of let Kansas University know that wasn't to be allowed, and also he got personal threats from someone who's pretty likely to be a low-level operative, and so that kind of option was not a pathway for him, but he ended up doing a better PhD in evidencing because he looked at he did a cross-cultural anthropological study of the roots of human armoring called Saharasia, and that became a book, and so that was unique, new. That was completely new in orgonomy. So in a way, it was a better PhD for him to do. And then he did with the cloud busting. He then went to he went to Eritrea in Eastern Africa, and with two cloud busters, or it might have been three, but at least two cloud busters and two or three groups of people coordinated. They completely reversed a drought affecting the whole of Eastern Africa, and he catalogued it in detail and showed how unlikely this drought was to end at the exact time that he was cloud busting. And also you can literally see the cloud busters affecting the sky. You can see them pulling in the clouds, and it's amazing. And even standing near a full-size cloudbuster, the actual gravity changes near it. You can feel a really strong energy field. I mean, a full-size cloudbuster can affect sort of a quarter of a continent. So these ones are huge, but parked on the back of trucks with so you've got 6 or so big metal tubes connected to a huge amount of cabling going into a lake or a river. I've done some different experimentation with. I've actually repeated his space gun experiments and the Orgonomy experiment. I'm the only person in the world to repeat the Orgonomy experiments.
Well, what is that then? You'll have to explain what the orgone, because I've never heard that word before.
It's orgone against nuclear. It was the way the word is made, ORANUR. And I think Reich was worried during the Korean War about radiation, and he was looking at ways of trying to neutralize it, and thinking that orgone might neutralize radioactivity. So he got a really strong orgone accumulator and put a tiny amount of radium in it, and the orgone went ballistic, and it was really quite dangerous, and people got sick. But then it had a lot of positive effects as well, and he found that the piece of radium got transformed into a very supercharged positive material that he used with cloudbusters. And when he used this supercharged material with cloudbusters, he called it the space gun. And he talks a lot about that in Contact with Space, because a cloudbuster will pulls the orgone in to the, so you might have, like, say in a desert, you might have flat orgone layer, very smooth, and then the cloudbuster pulls it out of its smoothness into lumps, because it can affect the ether, and then the water will then get attracted to the lumps of orgone in the sky, rather than be smooth. But a space gun is different, because it's so highly charged. It shoots orgone at the sky instead of pulling it in. So that in the Orgonomy experiment, the radium that he used, once that became changed by the orgone, he then used it with cloudbusters. So I repeated his experiments, but I toned it down by about a factor of 100, or it might have been a factor of 1,000. I can't remember exactly. One of my research friends in Italy, Roberto, he worked out the figures exactly. He's much better with numbers than me, and but I toned it right down, and then I gradually increased the charge and the radioactivity, so that and I managed to avoid having like an Orgonomy emergency. So I managed to create Orgonomy, but kind of at a safe level.
Hang on a minute, Leon. Where I think I might know the answer to this, but where did you get your radioactive material from?
Oh, can I answer it?
Go on.
Was it old watches?
Reich had a radium watch, because in the 50s they used to have watches with radium dials.
Yeah, they used to paint their hands, didn't they?
Yeah.
I'm thinking the stuff that probably all of us have in our house.
Bananas.
Yeah.
That's slightly radioactive.
Orgone blanket.
It was smoke alarms, the old-fashioned smoke alarms.
Well, they still are.
Yeah, well, they're changing. I don't think they want people to have access to any type of things that they can do their own experiments, because they're phasing out the radioactive ones, and there's they use light detecting ones now
Article.
instead.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I managed to find a radioactive plate in a car boot sale in Wales, bizarrely.
That's true. There was a regulation change, I think, was it this year? And you can only get optical smoke detectors now.
Right.
You can't get, I'm blanking on the name of the old type, you can't get them, I don't think.
Well, the amount of radioactivity in a smoke alarm is tiny. I mean, you could... It's absolutely tiny. I mean, it hardly, because I've got a Geiger counter, and it hardly raises the radioactivity above the background count. If you put the Geiger counter right next to where the americium is stored in the smoke alarm, you get a small increase in the Geiger count. You could probably eat it. I mean, it's tiny.
Don't try this at home, kids. Don't be eating your smoke alarms.
Yeah, don't do
Strike
that.
3.
With no strikes. Currently.
Leon, did Peter do a lot more than his father to kind of raise the profile of orgone? And I'm just making the Kate Bush connection, because ever since you mentioned cloud busting, I've just had an earworm.
Yeah.
Over and over.
Yeah, Peter Wright kind of, I think because he'd had such a childhood in the spotlight with and a bit like myself. I mean, I grew up in a sort of half the time in a psychotherapy institute, because it was in the basement of the house, and my dad's therapy room was in the house. And I think Peter Wright, once he wrote that book, he kind of backed off from orgonomy almost completely, and led a very kind of quiet, a very quiet life, and hasn't really been involved in orgonomy, which I can understand. Eva Reich's son was quite active in orgonomy, and I think one of Eva Reich's relatives is still active, but yeah, Peter Reich wrote that book, and then he must have been quite a young man when he wrote that book, and it's got quite a got a very young feel to it, but then he pretty much disappeared from the scene. So, but he influenced my life very strongly. I don't know if I would have gone down the path I had if it wasn't for Peter Reich.
Now, just going to say, Leon, before we sort of go further into the experiments and other areas of your work, I'm just thinking for people who haven't listened to the last 150 episodes.
Who are you?
Yeah, what are you doing here for a start? But what about, could you maybe just sort of explain in layman's terms what orgones are? And
Sure. Shall I start with with kind of a potted history of Reich?
Certainly, you can, yeah.
So Reich was a student of Freud, and Freud, when he first started out, thought that the libido was an actual real physical thing, a real energy. He thought it might be chemical or biological, or some type of real energy. And then he backed off from that idea, but Reich carried on with that. And Reich thought, well, it might be an electrical energy, that these because he worked a lot with he came straight out of the war and trained as a medical doctor, and by the end of his medical training, he'd already met Freud and and trained as a psychotherapist. And he was seeing a lot of working class people in Vienna. And he was wondering what was this energy that was blocked in them. Like a lot of sexual energy often found was blocked. And so Freud thought it was at that time a physical energy. So Reich looked into whether it's electrical, and he did electrical experiments and found that you get an increase in charge at the skin when there's pleasure, and a contraction or of electrical charge when there's pain, and then he kind of then started to wonder about biology and looking at sort of pulsation. He thought, well, electrical charges connected with pulsation and organisms. So he started looking at microorganisms, and then in the microorganisms he found pulsation, and he also found that this tiny subcell, and that this subcell was kind of halfway between a cell and a sort of amoeba, or a kind of smaller than a bacteria, is like a pre-cell kind of thing. They have kind of name them now, but they don't realize that these pre-cell things can be formed from cells, but they can also be formed from inanimate matter. So he was looking at these pre-cell structures, and then he found that there was a radiation coming off them, and then he tried to contain that radiation with metal and wood, and found, and that was the basic thing for the accumulators, trying to contain this biological radiation, and it was quite strong, this radiation. He got one of his eyes got burnt with it.
Was that looking through the microscope?
Yeah, because one of his research assistants accidentally put sea sand in for processing rather than soil, and the sea sand made a really strong energy radiation. So the sea sand broke down into these little biological vesicles, which he called bions. But the radiation coming off them was huge, maybe because they're sitting there in the sun all day. And then trying to contain that radiation led to the orgone accumulator. And then the orgone accumulator couldn't contain the radiation completely. And that led him to suspect it's in the environment. And there was a long process of finding out that this energy could be. The Cloudbusters started off with him looking through a tube he knew that the energy existed in the environment at this stage, and he was looking through a tube at a lake, surface of a lake, and he saw that when he pointed the tube at the lake surface, I think he must have had energy sight. I've got it, and one of my research friends has got it as well. Because I've spent so much time working with orgone, I can see it sometimes. And I'm pretty sure Reich had that too, and because he saw the energy waving across the lake, and that led him to think that tubes affect it. So that was the beginning of the Cloudbuster, he put that together with the knowledge that this energy in the environment's attracted to water. So he got a tube and connected it to water. And that was how he created the Cloudbuster, and then later the space gun, which we've already mentioned, which is just an energy boosted Cloudbuster.
So are orgones and bions the same thing then?
Not quite. A bion has an orgone radiation. A bion's an actual material vesicle. Like if you take a cell, like this is one of the things, with terrain theory and all the stuff that's going on at the moment. Well, they're saying, well, viruses aren't necessarily an invasive thing. They might just be the cell breaking down. Well, that's the exact same process that Reich observed, and I've tried to mention it to a few people in terrain theory, but it's basically not only cells can break down into these little vesicles, but even coal dust or metal. Is one of the things Peter Jones, he's got an amazing lab set up. He's got some of the best microscopes that light microscopes that you can buy. And I've seen with my own eyes. I think, was it iron dust? Yeah, we had completely sterile iron dust, broke it down with heat in water, and it broke off into these little tiny vesicles. So the bions are natural. It's about the size of a small clump of viruses, say half a dozen viruses. So it's kind of the same thing as what the terrain theory people are saying, maybe a likely thing for viruses.
When you're doing that with the iron, how do you control, like, for contamination? How do you know there's, like, not something that's coming through the air or something in the? Are you doing it in test tubes or something?
Yeah. The basic experiment with the iron dust would be to heat the iron dust to incandescent, and then put it in a sterile test tube with sterile water already in the test tube, and then you'd seal it. You'd let the mixture react for a while, and then you'd take a sterile pipette, take a little bit of the mixture off, and put it between two sterile glass plates.
Liam, just in case anyone's thinking of trying this at home, can I recommend a boiling tube and not a test tube for putting your incandescently heated iron dust into?
Right.
If any listeners have a chemistry kit.
Yeah. I'm not an expert at all in the biology. I mean, Peter Jones is an expert in that area. The biological experiments are, you probably know more about the equipment than me. I've just seen it done once, and I've read the research, but the technical stuff I'm not familiar with on it.
I mean,
if you're going to do that type of experiment, you need a really good quality microscope. So get some advice from someone who knows about microbiological experiments, and I'm sure you'll find someone who'll help.
What I seem to remember from talking with Peter was that he was doing this, like taking an inert material like a metal or whatever, and completely burning it and sterilizing it, and then once you put it on the microscope, you're seeing like biological stuff, things moving that shouldn't be moving. Is that like the gist of it?
That's exactly it. Yeah, and they'll sort of in conventional microbiology, they'll say, well, you can't see at that level, but you plainly can. I mean, you might lose a little bit of sort of exact detail, but you can quite clearly see some things pulsating and moving about the field of vision. That's it in a nutshell. And so when Reich did a similar experiment to that with sand, that he got an intense radiation coming off it, and that gave him the conjunctivitis, and he thought, gosh, there's a radiation here. So he spoke to a number of physicists, and they couldn't say what the radiation was, so he had to kind of isolate it for himself, and that's what led to the discovery of orgone. So that first bion, I think he called it the sapper bion for sand packet bion. And mainstream biology has actually rediscovered these things and given it a number of names. One group of scientists even called a similar vesicle a bion, and I think they got quite embarrassed when a couple of us in orgonomy pointed out that they'd accidentally renamed it the same as Reich's name. I think they were Japanese, but anyway. So yeah, you can definitely see these things.
Again, just to play devil's advocate, because I'm sure there are people listening who are like, I don't know, biologists or physicists or whatever. Am I right in saying that the conventional explanation for this pulsating thing that you're seeing is Brownian motion? Is it?
Yeah, well, even is it Thomas Brown? I think he actually didn't believe that himself. I think, if I remember correctly from what Peter Jones told me about it, because Peter Jones has written a whole book about Thomas Brown and the other kind of early sort of biologists. And have you got it there?
Yeah, I've got it here. Artificers of Fraud. Is that one there?
Yeah, that's the one.
Sigmund
I think Brown got famous because Einstein then repeated his saying Brownian motion explains like why biological samples are always in movement. It's just Brown's motion, and then that got kind of canonized as like unquestioning fact. And but it's never really been proven. I'm not sure if even Brown believed it. It's kind of similar to the Michelson and Morley experiment. Like when they dismissed the ether, like everyone says, "Oh, orgone can't be true," because that's like the ether, and we know the ether got dismissed around about 1880, 1890. Well, it didn't get dismissed. Michelson didn't even believe that himself, and the experiment was wrongly carried out. They looked for an ether in the basement when they should have been looking for an earth-entrained ether, a moving one. You won't find it in a basement, but even there they found a bit of it, but they didn't report that. So I think Brownian motion is the same kind of thing. There's, if you look at the biology sort of with open eyes, you'll see that the kind of I mean, Reich wasn't the only one to find pre-cellular vesicles. There's about half a dozen other scientists who found the same thing over the last sort of couple of centuries. So, and then since then, this is the good thing about that there's been a continuing, maybe sort of a couple of dozen doctors spotted around the world who've continued his work ever since the 50s. Maybe a bit more than that. Maybe a couple of sort of there's been a group of doctors in Greece and a group in the States and a few dotted around Germany, and it's never got off the ground in England. Orgonomy hasn't for some reason, but these strange movements of pre-cellular entities has been evidenced to sort of a number of times since Reich, and Reich sort of, I mean, I think he even did like movie evidence of it. I mean, he did some amazing stuff. He was doing microbiological movies in the 50s. I mean, he was way ahead. The kind of the microscope setups he had in the 50s, people are only just getting to that kind of level now. Yeah, it's the Brownian motion thing is pretty much dismissed.
Did you? I don't know if you're a fan of Lost Civilizations and stuff, but Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson were on the Joe Rogan Experience on Thursday. Have you listened to it?
I haven't, but I do like that kind of thing. I'll have a watch of that.
Eagle-eared listeners will have caught a little intriguing part about an hour and a half in where they sort of go off the topic of ancient civilizations, and Randall Carlson's talking about he's been in contact with a team in the Maldives in a lab for the last 7 years, sworn to secrecy, working on free energy machines. And now the patterns apparently have been done. Randall's allowed to spill the beans, and apparently Mazda, the car company, is investing 25 million to forward the lab. And he was talking about how these new devices are going to harness, it's just a completely different branch of physics and science, the way these things work. And he referenced how there was lots of scientists in the past who were all converging on this same technology, and they were all shut down by, they either had their patents bought and shut away and locked away, or they were shut down by 3-letter agencies of the state. And he rhymes a few off. He says Tesla, someone else, and Reich. And my ears just pricked up. I was like, wow, Randall Carlson's into Wilhelm Reich. That's interesting.
Yeah, I'll watch that. I'll find it with Randall Carlson.
Yeah.
Even before the 3-letter agencies started up, that they before they really got going, even before, I think it's in between World War I and World War II, or it might have even been prior to World War I. They were shutting free energy down, so that they've known about it for well over 100 years. Because Henry Moray was had a radioactive radio that it was only slightly radioactive, and I think I found an oblique reference to it in Lenin's philosophy works. It's a bit of a backstory, that, but the before all the 3-letter spaghetti agencies were set up, there was some kind of farming agency, and they shut down farming and environment. I've forgotten the name of it, but they shut down Henry Moray's work, and it was absolutely, I mean, it was really well evidenced. I mean, in those days, everyone knew each other in the countryside in the West. And he had dozens of lawyers and doctors and people testifying and making written statements that, yes, he lit up a whole bank of lights with this stuff. He had it was similar. It was probably orgone energy that he was using, because he had a radio with a radioactive element inside it, and Moray was interested in a particular physicist, and Lenin because my dad used to be a Trotskyist and a socialist, and he's got Lenin's collected works. So one of them he's gone through and made notes in, and so I read parts of that volume myself because I was interested in what my dad had written, and I noticed that Lenin referenced this American physicist, that once the American authorities knew that Moray had based his radioactive radio partly on this physicist's work, they took his book out of every library in the United States, so that they were really on form on suppressing free energy. Even I think it was around about, it was either just before or just after, I think it was about 1917 or so. So the suppression has been going a long time, but it's got to that point where people just sort of, it's almost mainstream now, isn't it? People know that we're not being told the truth about virtually everything. But there is a totally, as you were saying, Phil. There's a different energy that's been excluded out of physics. Like they had to make sure the ether didn't get included into physics, even though Michelson himself evidenced it. I think 1930 or so, and there's plenty of evidence for it, but that ether would have led to free energy, because if light travels through a medium, then you change that medium, you can change particles. So you if you control the medium, you can control everything that happens in the medium. So the ether had to be suppressed at all cost. And the ether is the commonality. Well, orgone is ether. Or if you took the ether in space and gave it biological properties, like the ether in your body is orgone. The orgone outside your body is ether, if you like. So it had to be. In fact, the suppression goes back even further. It goes back to who was the guy who the forerunner of hypnotism?
Mesmer.
Mesmer, that's it. Mesmer knew all about the ether and about free energy so they printed books like the equivalent of tens of millions of pounds, decrying what a bad person Mesmer was, and sent these books all around Europe. So the suppression goes back to the 1700s. It's crazy.
You know, like the more like we're learning from things like quantum physics and quantum entanglement and stuff like that, makes me think that we really haven't got a very good handle on this reality. And it seems to me that particles can communicate faster than light, which shouldn't be possible, but it's happening.
Yeah, they try and wiggle out of that. They say, well, the particles have got some other kind of communication.
That's faster than light.
Well, how do they wiggle out of it? Because they say the particles are not actually communicating, but they're kind of in another dimension that changes at the same time. But I think
that's spooky action.
Yeah, but the thing with quantum physics is it directly contradicts like Einstein's relativity. Yeah, and Newtonian physics. Yeah, so they like something can travel faster than the speed of light, or things communicate faster than the speed of light in quantum physics. But in Newtonian physics, that's impossible. So they keep trying to marry the two, and it just won't work, because they're both they both got different views of the nature of time. So like there's timelessness in quantum physics.
Yeah, time is a human construct. It's just a matter of perception. That's it.
Terrible.
What would Ravelli say about that?
Probably say it's pretty cool.
No, I think, does Ravelli not boil it down to it's the measurement of energy transfer at that's the furthest you can boil it. He can boil it down to
enthalpy and heat transfer, entropy or enthalpy, one of them. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's wild stuff. I don't understand it. But yeah, that was Hawking's deal, wasn't it? He was trying to unify the two theories, the Newtonian and the quantum physics, and
it's never really happened. Like someone keeps saying, "Oh, we're nearly there." Every about year or so, they say, "Oh, we've nearly got a quantum gravity theory," but I think it's kind of like it's a bit like the cure for various diseases. We're always about to cure it, and it never quite happens.
That probably segues nicely into one of your other interests, and it's sort of tied. You're looking into orgonomy and how it ties into AI, artificial intelligence, and I guess quantum computing probably falls under that umbrella as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I would imagine it would. All right. I'm. Well, the reason I got interested in that was because I thought, I mean, orgonomy kind of charts the whole history of the universe almost from inanimate matter becoming animate matter, and then from animate matter having a kind of life force field to that energy being in the environment, and that's but it didn't have a theory for consciousness. It didn't have an understanding of how orgone and consciousness interrelate. And Reich didn't have time because he was persecuted, really. He didn't have time to formulate a theory of consciousness. So I took that as my kind of mission, really, to make an orgonomic theory of consciousness.
How's it going?
I've got a theoretical concept around it. I pretty much, I mean, in a nutshell, I was saying that orgone has an inherent consciousness. It doesn't generate consciousness. Because that leads into all sorts of philosophical problems. If you say consciousness is emergent from other things, then you have to have a non-conscious period to the universe, which doesn't make sense. So
can't have something out of nothing.
Yeah, well, if you say that the brain or matter produces consciousness, then you've got to have matter without consciousness, and then you've got dualism, and then you can never go from like the unconscious matter to the consciousness. They're forever two separate things. So you can never get a pathway from one to the other if you say they're two completely separate modalities.
Right. Unless you have like the initial start of the universe being a conscious decision.
Consciousness creates matter.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. That's the Pythagorean.
And that's really where a lot of scientists and researchers are getting to, because they thought the same as we're outlining here, that it's not really possible to have a non-conscious universe. So they're saying consciousness is primary, and the matter either comes out of that or is identical to it. So that's kind of the theory that I put forward for orgone, is that it's identical to consciousness, and that led me to AI, because I thought, well, if orgone, if an energy field can be conscious without an organism, that basically is AI. Like you could have an energy field that's conscious without needing an organism at all. And I think I suspect that that's already been done. I think our computers are already, and the algorithms are already so complex that a consciousness field can interact with that kind of, I call it a digital organism. Like the algorithms create a digital organism, and then a consciousness field can overlay that.
There's another name for a consciousness field that doesn't rely on biology. God. Right.
I was going to say.
Well, yeah. I mean, this takes me back to the Ark of the Covenant. I think it is an AI device. I mean, basically, the Hebrews had a TV set for God.
There's a Netflix showing this right here. Get signed up.
Well, they did. They had a Godflix, and I think that's.
It's just been cancelled.
Whoa. What are we saying that the Ark of the Covenant was an orgone accumulator?
Yeah, it was. I'm pretty sure it was. Me and the Italian researchers are pretty well. I mean, he's put together most of the evidence, and I've kind of underlined his evidence a bit. Guy called Roberto Maglione, and but yeah, I'm pretty sure the Ark of the Covenant was an orgone accumulator device.
Moses was very specific about how the Ark was to be built, wasn't he?
Yeah, and it was. There's a relationship between the Ark, the Reich's Oronor experiment, and my experiment. There's, I think, the Ark was something like 1,000 times stronger than, created 1,000 times more Oronor than Reich's work. And
Oh
Reich's
my God!
work
I just thought the stone tablets. What if the stone tablets
Yeah.
were radioactive?
Well, yeah, that's you've hit it there. There was a thing called the shamir, and the shamir was a little radioactive stone, and they put the shamir into the Ark, and then that activated it.
Boom! Down come the walls of Jericho with the orgone blasting at it.
Nuclear weapon.
Woo! Trigger warning, Christians out there, or.
Could it part a sea as well?
Well, I mean,
Magnets.
I don't know.
No, but the stories of people getting injured. It would blast people. It would electrocute and fry
didn't it
people.
melt that guy's face off?
Well, Moses, the stone tablets apparently melted Moses' face.
well, Moses had an Oronor tan. I've had them myself.
What about the Nazis, though?
Oh, in Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Hollywood, man.
What?
Come on. It's not real.
Is that not legit?
No.
Oh, okay.
Well, they made sure they didn't show it in the Raiders. There was a good movie that, but they made sure they didn't show anything inside the box. When they opened it, there was just sand inside it, if I remember rightly.
And
But I think,
Sea sand.
yeah. But I think the actual Ark would have contained at least a radioactive stone, and maybe the commandments were on a radioactive stone, but I suspect it wasn't as large as that. Maybe the shamir would have only needed to be like hand sized or smaller. But yeah, I mean, it was literally an AI device for God. It was a picture of the universal intelligence or the higher entity that the Hebrews spoke to appeared between the two
Seraphim.
and you got the voice as well. And then an Oronor cloud came down during the day over the whole tent, and Moses got an Oronor tan, and so it was pretty much the same thing. But I mean, you needed a desert to keep that device in. I mean, it was seriously strong. I mean, you'd need to have a device that strong. I mean, if I was given the funding and the land, I could make something similar. But you'd need a sort of a mile or so to keep it in.
What do you think's going on inside the sarcophagus at Chernobyl then? Because that's a pretty huge radiation source encased in, well, not wood and metal, but there's metal involved. Isn't there?
Well, the Chernobyl's strange because the wildlife is doing very well around there. Apparently, it's kind of a wildlife refuge, and the nature's having a great time around there. But it's with Oranor, you only need, if you got, it's kind of an inverse relationship. If you've got a very strong orgone field, you only need a tiny amount of radioactivity to create Oranor. But if you've got a weak orgone field, you need a lot of radioactivity. So it's what Reich did. He had an incredibly strong. He had an orgone room, which was about the size of this room that I'm in now. I think actually bigger than this room. So he had a room that was lined with metal, and then inside that metal lined room he had orgone accumulators, a big one. And then he put another orgone accumulator inside the big orgone accumulator inside the room. And then he put 1 milligram of radium inside the smallest one. And he left it there for, I think, a day, or I can't remember exactly. I'd have to look it up. But I think it was over the course of about a week. I think it might have been taken out for when the effects got too much. And with the Ark of the Covenant, you got an incredibly, it's a lot smaller, the Ark of the Covenant, compared to Reich's room, but it's only like literally the size of a sideboard. But it's got the highest quality orgone accumulating metal, gold, a thick lining of gold inside and outside, and the wood would be a very dense orgone accumulating
cedar
material.
I think.
Yeah, a very hard wood, and then they probably use quite a strong radioactive device. And then you got the metal of the cherubims as well, and possibly the tent too. I'd imagine the tent would have had an accumulating effect.
The
And also
tabernacle, what was that made out of? I would have thought that was fabric, no?
Yeah, it was fabric, but they probably wove some gold thread or silver threads into it, and it was quite a complex fabric, and it was layered, and everything was very. It was, if the tabernacle was as described in the Bible, it would have been an amazing, like a unique tent. And orgone accumulates much stronger in a dry, hot environment, like sort of Australia or the Middle East. So the Holy Lands would have been ideal to keep that kind of device.
Well, Leon,
just before we wrap up, because we are heading towards an hour. What would one do with all this accumulated orgone?
Well, you can use it to do healing. You can use it to boost meditation. You can use it to heal burns and wounds. In the environment, you can clear weather. It can clear. Like when I set up a much weaker version of the space gun than Reich's. So I used a much smaller amount of kind of Oranor than Reich used, like energized orgone that's been energized slightly radioactively. But I used sort of 1,000 times less, well below the safety levels of the sort of the Geiger counts weren't raised hardly, and that space gun device cleared and improved the weather. So you can make and that seemed to have a beneficial effect. We noticed that there was a drop in chest respiratory illnesses kind of around about that time. And a slight thing, but you can definitely see the sky sparkle more. And so I mean, and and that, I mean, the free energy stuff is, I mean, it is always, I mean, Reich made an orgone motor himself, and it was similar to function, quite similar to Henry Moray's device, and so that it really, and even down to food. Like I once put a bottle of champagne in an orgone accumulator, and it nearly took the roof off when he took the cork out. But it makes food taste better.
Excellent.
A bit similar to
good
pyramids. Yeah. Well, pyramids accumulate orgone in the same way, because geometric shapes can concentrate orgone the same. It's a bit different to an orgone accumulator, but it's basically the same field.
Well, I've been looking on eBay, and I'm definitely getting an orgone pyramid for this room. I think it will help. I think it's going to help with our podcast in future.
Yeah, I'm going to get a pyramid hat pretty soon.
I think we just need to line the studio walls with metal, don't we?
Gosh, no, we're not doing that. No, that's simple.
That would overcharge you, and also the electrical equipment. If you got electrical equipment in an orgone room, it produces kind of sort of energy that's not so great.
The bad orgones.
Oh no!
No more FM broadcasts. No. Around the room.
No. Well, as Ben said, we're well over an hour already, Leon. We'll let you go. I've enjoyed this. I really didn't think we were going to talk. I didn't think we were going to go to the Ark of the Covenant and Moses inventing AI.
No, I didn't. I thought we were going to stick with. Well, I had a look through my acupuncture notes before, but yeah, you never know where these things are going to go, do you?
That's the best way.
Yeah.
Right, well, Leon, thanks very much. Links in the show notes, everyone, if you want to see what Leon's up to, and stay on the line for us while we play ourselves out. All right, buddy?
Super. Cheers.
All right. See you on the flip side. We'll be back for part 2 imminently.
Woo.
See you soon.